You are now being recorded. Your voices are preserved for posterity.
Are you going to put this on YouTube?
Hey YouTube, subscribe to Dragon Ball Warfare.
Last chance.
Subscribe.
Last chance. Alright, so we are going to talk about what causes climate today. So, we're going to start with a very common misconception.
Subscribe to my channel.
There's a lot of people who think that only changes in atmosphere affect the climate. But this is not true, because as air moves over the ground, it's affected by the ground, the oceans, cloud cover can affect the air, even landforms like mountains. So, there's a lot of evidence to this. We've seen that the ocean plays a big role in climate maintenance, things like that, through changes in the ocean, watching the ice ages. So, be aware, climate change can be influenced by changes not only in the air, so not only the greenhouse effect, but things that change on the ground as well. To understand climate a little bit better, we need to get into what factors affect temperature. Weather changes every day. We observed the weather yesterday. It is climate that is the average year-to-year conditions of not just temperature, but your precipitation, wind, and clouds. And if you remember from looking at the globe yesterday with our little experiment, your latitude, how far away you are from the equator, also affects your temperature. These are not the only things that affect temperature, but these are a good start. So latitude, how far away from the equator you are. In the middle, it will say from 23.5 north to 23.5 south, we have the tropical zone. Don't really need you to know the numbers on that, just know it is in the middle by the equator. All the way at the poles, we have the polar zone. The polar zone is coldest. It's furthest away from where the Earth gets the most direct sun rays, and it's also the part where we get 24 hours of daylight in the summer and 24 hours of nighttime in the winter. In between those two, you have the temperate zone. That's kind of the nicest place to live. We live in the temperate zone. Camden is right there. We're pretty much dead in the middle of the temperate zone.
Whoa.
It is right here. So, altitude is also a factor in temperature, how high away from sea level you are. The higher up in altitude you go, if you remember from our atmosphere lesson, the higher up in altitude you go, the colder it gets. Altitude is a more important factor than latitude, because if you have a giant mountain on the same latitude as something close to sea level is going to be warmer than up on top of the mountain. The last thing that really sort of affects our climate is how far away you are from oceans. Oceans or large lakes tend to moderate the temperature, especially true on the west coast of North America, South America, and Europe. So not us, California. We have marine climates. Marine climates have very mild winters and cool summers because the ocean water holds on to its temperature a lot longer and affects the air on top of it a lot more. The East Coast does not really have this problem. So, marine climates are far more influenced by the regular patterns of ocean currents. So, we should remember ocean currents from when we talked about ocean currents. Some currents move warm water from the equator out towards the poles. Some currents move cold water from the poles down to the equator. They cool the air. These currents can either cool or warm the air nearby, giving you a different climate than you would expect for that latitude. There are, however, some places too far inland from an ocean to be affected by the climate. Certain portions of North America and certainly Asia are just too far away to be affected by the ocean. most of these areas, Canada, Russia, central United States, have what's called a continental climate, where you have very cold winters and very hot summers. Yeah. So, just a nice little fun fact. Certain animals have adapted to these extreme conditions. This polypepsis tree in Bolivia grows at the highest altitude of any tree. It's almost a mile in the... Oh, I'm sorry. I got that wrong. It's almost 2 miles in the air.
Maybe a tall tree.
What's that? It's not the tallest tree. It's just the highest one can grow. So, the last bit... There are some factors that affect precipitation that we haven't talked about. The main factors that we have are prevailing winds, presence of mountains, and seasonal winds. Prevailing winds are winds that prevail. They always blow in the same direction no matter what. The jet stream is an example. We talked a little bit about prevailing winds when we talked about prevailing winds, but they always go in the same direction in a certain area. And this can affect where rain falls. Because if a prevailing wind happens to move over a mountain range, it always goes in the same direction over the mountain range. So it takes whatever moisture that air has and kind of forces it up into the air further, I should say up into the atmosphere, higher and higher because of how the mountain is sloped. As it goes up in the air, temperatures decrease, the water condenses, water vapor condenses into rain, and the windward side of the mountain gets a lot of precipitation. It's not always rain, because sometimes it's cold enough where it's snow. On the leeward side, being the side that isn't the windward side, the other side, you get very little precipitation, because it's all fallen out of the air. So, in some parts of the world, seasonal wind patterns can change what side of the mountain gets hit by the wind, but generally you have the same. And it's very interesting. If you ever see a mountain that's affected by this, one side of the mountain has plants, and the other side does not, because there's almost zero. It's almost a desert on the leeward side. Last thing you have are seasonal winds. And if you've ever heard of a place that has monsoons, it's a place with seasonal winds. During a certain time of year, the winds move in a certain direction. This is what causes nor'easters and hurricanes during late summer, early winter in the United States. There's a seasonal wind, conditions are just right, and you get these, essentially, it's a rainy season, you get these giant storms. So, that is our second attempt at this video. Let's see what happens. So.